Okay, I'm here to talk about all things hair covering. Why we do it, when we do it, how we don't do it, everything that there is to do about hair covering for a Jewish woman. And I also have a bunch of questions that I'm going to be answering at the end of the video. I'm Haber-Goldstein. I run an organization called Questioning the Answers, and I am basing this video off my book called Questioning the Answers. There's a chapter in here about modesty, and in there's a section on hair covering, which lists all the source and the trajectory. I'm going to speak it out and explain it a little bit more and answer any questions that you guys had. And if there's anything I didn't answer, feel free to ask in the comment section and I'll answer it. Okay, so every single thing that we do has a source in the Torah. We have all of the ways that we understand it, but the most important part of it is that it is sourced in the Torah and it is completely coming from the word of Hashem. So the way to find sources is many. The way that I like to is I literally just Google and I read a ton of articles about the topic and I write down any source that comes up in Tanakh, right? Tanakh is Torah, Navi, and Ksuvim. So not just Chamisha Torah, but also Navi and also Tehillim. So the first source is in Sefer Bamidbar, in the part where it talks about Sota. Sota is an adulteress who cheated on her husband and she's being punished. It's very complicated, a lot of nuance and context that goes in. Yes, it's problematic with feminism. No, it never happened. And we're not getting into it because we're talking about hair covering. Different video for feminism. So the first source that we have is in this section where the Torah talks about Sota. The Torah tells us that the first thing that the Kohen does when the Sota comes to the Beis HaMikdash is that he para et rosh haisha. He makes her hair wild, which is really vague and really unclear, but we'll get into that in a second. The second source we have is in Shir HaShirim. When Shlomo HaMelech is extolling the beauty of his love, he says, oh, her beautiful hair is flowing from her braids. And that's the second source that we have for hair being somewhat tied up. Now, we have the ways of understanding halacha and understanding what is applicable and practical for me today from the Torah. We have some sort of process that we go through. The first process is, after we learn the source and we see the source, is going to the Mishnah, right? We have the Torah that Hashem gave Moshe on Har Sinai and the oral Torah that Hashem told Moshe on Har Sinai. And that oral Torah was passed down generation to generation until it was written down in the Mishnah. So the Mishnah really is just an explanation of what the Torah is saying. So we have the Torah, which is saying parat rosh haisha, which is vague and unclear because what does that mean? He messed up her hair. It could just mean that he went like that to her hair, right? So what does it mean? Let's go look in the Mishnah of how the Mishnah explains this. So the Mishnah tells us in Ksubos 7:6 that if a woman goes out with wild hair, she can be divorced and she does not get to keep her ksuba, right? So in that time period, men were not allowed to divorce their wife unless they had a valid reason and they were allowed to by Beis Din. And even then, when they divorced their wives, they had to pay them the ksuba rights. So the Mishnah is telling us that a woman who goes out with wild hair or sal parua can be divorced and she completely loses all of her ksuba rights. This is what the Mishnah tells us, which is a little intense. So now if you go to Ksubos 72a, because the way that the Gemara works is you have the line from the Mishnah and then the Gemara just discusses it at length. So first in Ksubos 7:6 we have this line where the Mishnah is telling us, yeah, a woman who has wild hair in the marketplace, that's a substantial reason to divorce her. And then the Gemara goes and discusses this for a very long time. And in Ksubos 72a, the rabbis discuss this and they come to the conclusion that a married woman has to have something in her hair or on her head. Whatever it is depends on the society that she lives in. But the reason for this was that the women who walked around with wild, messy hair without anything on it or without it tied up in some way were the women who were prostitutes and lowlives and such. So the women who were married who would walk around like that were kind of asking for it. They were saying, I'm available. It was kind of a societal way to say I'm available. So that's why she was a substantial reason to be divorced. So they're saying from this we see that a woman just has to cover her hair in some way. It has to be whatever the societal norm is in her community, in where she lives, and we spoke about community in the last video. Whatever the societal norm is, that's what she has to do, so that she's being respectful to her marriage. And she's saying, I'm married, I'm not available, right? So then you have the Rambam, who wrote the Mishnah Torah, which is basically, he came after the Gemara, and he's like hundreds of years, and he summarized everything that happened in the Gemara to the bottom line. And the reason he did this was because he said not everybody has time to read all these long conversations. Let's just give them the bottom line of what halacha is. And he gives the bottom line, which is that she has to cover her hair, whatever her community does. And he reiterates and he explains why Das Yehudis is so important and why the community is so important. And he brings in other things, saying that she also has to wear an apron and she has to do other things. All these things that were socially saying, I'm married. And it was kind of the things, it's almost like nowadays wearing a wedding ring, right? Like these were the things that they socially did to show that they were married. And he's like, that's why your community and your society is so important here, because it's really about showing, however your society shows, that you are taken, that you're not available. So that's basically the end of it. The Shulchan Aruch that just reiterates it again, and everybody just keeps reiterating, like, whatever, you have to cover your hair, however your community covers your hair, you have to cover your hair. And it kind of like evolved into covering because socially that's what was done. It was just women covered their hair, especially married women covered their hair. So you had to cover your hair however your community does it. And some people will only cover the crown of their head because like they were covering it with a basket. So like some people hold by that, and some people only cover like whatever it is that your community covers. That's what you have to cover, right? That's the first source. So the second source goes into Shir HaShirim, and that's the one that talks about how Shlomo HaMelech is coming and extolling, he's saying, going on and on about how beautiful the love of his life is, and I think that that's like Kabbalistically he's talking about Yerushalayim or Bnei Yisrael or whatever, and he says, your beautiful hair is flowing, this is in Shir HaShirim 4:2, your beautiful hair is flowing from your braids, mibad samatech, right? So again, coming in and showing that the hair was tied up in some way, and that was kind of like the norm. It was so normal that this is what he was talking about, right? And the Mishnah comes and explains that this means that, because the Mishnah now comes in with a whole different idea, which explains that this means that a man cannot pray in front of loose hair of a married woman, because he would be distracted by her beauty and he would not be able to focus and concentrate on praying. So therefore, he's not allowed to pray in front of loose hair of a married woman, and it is called erva. Then the Mishnah Torah comes in, again, the Rambam comes in and explains that when your hair is down and loose and wild, there's like a sexual component to it, which, you know, there is a little bit of a sexual component. It's like having your hair down. And he's like, when your hair is up, like you're a little bit more aloof and removed and not so like comfortable. So from there, we learn that like a woman cannot be having her hair loose and flowy in front of a man that is praying because it is too sexy, basically. Now, I do want to point out one thing. Erva is not a mitzvah on a woman. Erva is a mitzvah on a man. This is not saying that women have to cover their hair at all times. This is saying that if a woman's hair isn't covered, a man can't pray in front of that woman. The reason that we cover our hair at all times is because of the first source. The reason that we cover our hair in front of men who are praying, or men don't pray in front of women whose hair is uncovered, is because of the second source. This is most definitely the man on the man. That's the man's responsibility. We don't have to worry about it. We can be nice, we can be considerate, but we don't have to worry about it. And which is why, like, for example, in a shul, if there are women who don't cover their hair, they're behind the mechitza, they're not like in front of the man, it's technically okay. So let's take the erva section and let's just take that and put that in shul. When we are in front of a man who is praying, especially if the man was there first, like, tie your hair up, put it in a pony, do something like that. It's just disrespectful to take a person who's trying to do a mitzvah and make them do an avera, right? Like, that's just v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, let's be nice Jews to each other. But it's definitely not your responsibility, and if it really stresses you out, just don't stand in front of a man when he's praying. But the second thing, right, the idea of having our hair tied up in some way, I know that the argument immediately becomes, well, that was the social construct at the time, and nowadays it's not the social construct, and most women do wear their hair down and loose, and like if you walk in the street, you will see a lot of women with their hair down, and it's not considered promiscuous or inappropriate, right? But at the same time, I don't think that the Torah would have come and taken something that was merely a social construct that was kind of limited to the time period that the Torah was given, and make that something that was written in the Torah for eternity. And I do think that if the Torah goes out of its way to tell us that he made her hair wild, her hair was tame and he made her hair wild, that there is a value in having tame hair. That there is a value in having your hair not messy, not wild, and tamed in some way with something. What that thing is depends on your community. If you live in a community where they wear hats, wear a hat. Where they wear scarves, wear a scarf. I would say that if you live in a community where people don't cover their hair, it would be right to make sure that your hair is always neat and taken care of and not wild and out there. I think that there's an important thing that I have to differentiate here because it's bothering me. Do I really cover my hair just to show people that I'm married? Is that really the whole reason that I cover my hair, is to show people that I'm married? Because I don't really like doing things for other people. I like doing things for me, right? But here's the thing, that all of modesty and the whole idea of modesty, and this goes back to the first video of modesty that I did, is really just an idea of how a daughter of Hashem represents herself and represents the Jewish nation and represents God, right? We hold ourselves with a specific level of respect, and what is that level? How do we hold ourselves? A princess is a princess. We spoke about all this in the previous video. And I think that there was this idea of walking around with wild, crazy hair just isn't befitting a Jewish woman. That it's not necessarily to show people I'm married. It's more like holding myself up to respectful standards of the same idea of covering my basic erba that we spoke about in the previous video, right? This is more about holding myself as a Jewish woman than proving to people that I'm married. It happens to be that the married woman has this social construct, but I don't think that it's necessarily solely to tell people I'm married, because I can use my mouth for that. So the first question I have is, what is the point of a wig if it looks like our own hair and it's hard to distinguish the difference? You have to tie up your hair in whatever way is accepted in your community. If your community accepts wearing wigs as a way of tying up your hair, because your hair is technically tied up, right? This is not my hair. My hair is in a bun. Underneath this, there is something on my head. If your community accepts this as the normal, socially normal way to cover your hair, then it's fine. It's more than fine. It's exactly what the Torah said to do. You're doing something that is socially saying, I am not available, right? The second question is showing the tefach, like Rav Moshe wrote, legit. So first of all, I don't know if you know who Rav Moshe Feinstein is, but he was one of the biggest Gadol Hadars, and he came after the Holocaust, and he was really widely accepted by the whole entire Jewish community. And I really would have a very hard time arguing with anything that he said as not legit. Now, what he was answering was, can a man pray in front of a woman whose hair is showing? And how much of a hair? And he says if there's less than a tefach showing, then it's fine. Tefach is less than a tefach, it's not really considered anything. In all areas of halacha, less than a tefach, it's not really considered mamashi, it's not actual, so it's fine. And Rav Moshe Feinstein says that it's fine. Now, I do want to say that we have this concept of your hair being tied up in some way, not necessarily completely covered. The idea of covering comes from Kabbalah, actually, which is from the Zohar, who explains that the bracha of a household, the blessing to the household, comes through a woman's hair, and that if she covers it, it's like she's holding the bracha in, and that's why some women are really very makbid to cover every single inch of their hair, because it's like the blessing is being held in. This is in no way halacha. This is Kabbalah, but that is where covering versus tying comes up. Also because socially we covered more than we tied, so that kind of also never really went away. But I think that that's an important differentiation also. Can you include shaving? So shaving is a little bit complicated. I'm going to do my best, okay? So there are some communities that say that before they get married, on their wedding night or whatever, they shave their entire head, so that they actually don't have any hair. This is not something that all Jews do at all. There's a few reasons that I've heard for it. One is that it creates knots, and it's a chatzitza, which is kind of like a blockage for the water in the mikvah to get to the body, and you can't go to the mikvah with hair on your body, so they shave it all off. There are others who say that it's because this way you can make sure that your hair is never, ever, ever showing. So even this little bit, or over here when you're wearing a snoot or a hat. So this kind of ensures that your hair never gets shown. I will say that if you go to the one of the blessing coming through the hair of a woman, where did the blessing go? I will also say that there are quite a few proofs to point this idea of shaving your head to a really horrible story that happened in Europe, where there were a few towns where it became like kind of socially normal for women to be kidnapped and raped by whoever was ruling the town, or whatever, like landlord or whatever, poets, right? And that the women started shaving their heads so that they'd be ugly and not get kidnapped and raped. And it kind of became like so normal for them that it became like a Kabbalah that they took on themselves, and it became so normal that then it became like, wait, is hair a chatzitza if I grow out my hair? And then it kind of just like stuck from that, and now that it happened for 3 generations, it's like as if like it was taken on by the community, so you have to do it, and it's all of these different things. I will say that there is a lot of room to not shave, but it's very much a personal decision, and it's not something that is basic halacha at all. Where does covering only the head, top, crown part versus all of your hair come from? So I'll tell you. The Torah says, Para et rosh haisha. He made her head wild, not hair. It doesn't say para sa'ar isha. It says rosh haisha. So that's where the idea of covering only your head, your actual head, comes from. And it even is like compounded by the fact that in a lot of social circles, the way that the women covered their hair was by wearing baskets on their head when they would go to the marketplace. So that also like even reinforced the idea that it's just the crown. So that's why a lot of people cover only the crown. And you'll even have women who will wear, and like very accepted to wear a kippah fall, where it's like a wig that's only here and it only covers the top of your head, and the hair comes down and it mixes with your natural hair. What's the basic halacha? Where did all the extras come from, and why? So it really is not something that's like basic and extras. It's more something that's like very much dependent on community. You have to do something because the Torah told you to do something. So, put in a bobby pin. But beyond that, it's really based on your community. But your community is halacha. So whatever your community does is the basic for you. And I not cover my hair at home, even if people may see through the window. And the Gemara talks about, and the Rambam talks about this, that in chatzar beta, in her own courtyard, she doesn't have to cover her hair because this is her home. There's like a level of comfort in her own home that she has of like letting her hair down. Nowadays, we don't really hold by that because socially it's not really acceptable. If I would uncover my hair in my house and my husband's friends would come over, they would be very uncomfortable. My job is not to make people feel uncomfortable. It's like, it's not that important to me. But I do have a lot of friends who don't cover their hair in their house, and like, it's whatever. Who cares? I mean, the Gemara says it's fine. Is there a certain amount of hair in front of a fall that can be uncovered? I know it has to do with community. So this is a fall. This is my hair, right? It has to do with community. It has to do with if it's socially acceptable. But it's totally fine. There are even people who cover just their pony. There are people who cover just the crown. The basic, yes, you can, obviously, you can leave hair in front of your wig, especially if it's less than a tefach, like Moshe Feinstein says. Tefach is the size of 3 fingers. What's the deal with lace fronts, lace tops, and silk tops? So, lace tops, lace fronts, these are wigs that you cannot tell they're wigs. Now, I'm going to say this, that from women have told me all the time, like, I can tell when it's a wig. You can tell. You can tell because you are in this world of wigs. Ain't nobody out there knowing this. Nobody even knows that this is a wig, even though right now it looks like a rat's nest. Nobody knows that it's a wig except for people who are aware of wigs. Like, nobody's walking around thinking, oh, her hair is too full and beautiful. So this whole idea that like lace tops are not kosher because nobody can tell that you're married because it doesn't look like a wig, doesn't even matter, because it applies to the same thing. If your community thinks that it's okay to wear lace tops, it's okay to wear lace tops. We don't really wear wigs so much to tell other people that we're married. It's more we dress in a way that's socially respectful to our marriage. We're not being I'm saying the same thing can apply that if you have a wig that is incredibly wild. I'm not 100% sure that would be within the spirit of the law, right? Even though technically it's fine because you can wear a wig because your community wears wigs, it's not really within the spirit of the law. And the same goes for the lace fronts and the lace tops. Technically it's fine because your community accepts it. And this idea that it's maris ayin because nobody can tell doesn't really hold up because nobody can tell with a lot of things. So that doesn't really hold up, and it's not really based in any real source of anything. I've looked into it. According to exact halacha, proof in Hebrew, what area must be covered and how? So this question is a little bit problematic because what you're asking is, what did the Torah say? What's the actual source? But we know, based on how the halachic evolution works, that we don't do things based on what the words in the Torah were, rather what we understand them to be and how they've evolved throughout the generations. However, the exact words in the Torah are two: Rosh Haisha, so your head, the crown of your head, and Sa'arech mibat zamatech, where your hair is flowing from your braids. So you kind of have all of it there, but the one of them is from Shlomo HaMelech and one of them is from Chamisha Chomshei Torah, so one of them holds up a little bit more. The basic without anybody's explanation at all is that there has to be something taming your hair. Are there any halachos restricting a husband to see his wife's natural hair, for example, while Nida? So, two answers. First of all, when he's making kiddush, right, or davening in any way, you shouldn't have your hair untied. You should have your hair tied up in some way. So, even though I don't cover my hair in front of my husband, on Friday night when we don't have guests, if he's making kiddush, I will put something on my head because he's not allowed to make a bracha in front of it. But regarding Nida, first of all, disclaimer, I still have not yet learned all the halachos of harchakos of Nida, and I am learning them now, so everything I say now might change. But what I learned when I was a kala was that when you're Nida, when you're on your period, you and your husband are not allowed to have sex. It says in the Torah, lo titkared b'ayavad, don't come close to it. It's like you're not supposed to even do things that will turn you on. So we don't just not have sex, we also don't do things that would make us want to have sex. So if there's something that turns your husband on, or if there's something that turns you on, you're not supposed to do it. So if your hair is something that turns your husband on, if it's flowing really beautifully, if you wear it in like a really sexy way, then yeah, don't do that when you're Nida. But other than that, I'm pretty sure there's absolutely no halacha about your husband seeing your hair while you're Nida. I mean, he's your husband. But I might be wrong, and this might change in a future video, but I'm pretty sure I'm not. What is the halacha of a child seeing their mother's natural hair? Pretty sure there's none. I have never heard of a source for it. I know that is that story of Kimches and Chana, who they had the 7 children who are amazing because the walls of their house never saw the hair on their head. I know that there are women who cover their hair because of what the Zohar says, which is that the blessing comes through the hair and covering your hair and whatever. I know that there are other people who cover their hair in front of their children just because they feel like it's not appropriate for their children to see them in a way like that. Like these women would also usually not walk around in pajamas. I know that it's a stringency that people take on themselves because it's a schus that you'll have children who are tzaddikim. But I also know that the Gemara says that there's no promises that will happen because there are a lot of people who took that on and didn't get that reward. So I don't know. I'd be careful with taking on stringencies. Halacha of a divorced woman. I got a heter to not cover, but just curious why. So the idea of divorced women is that once we take something on, we don't take it off. So once you take on a chumrah or a mitzvah or something, then you're not supposed to go like down. So once you started covering your hair, you're not supposed to uncover your hair. That's the idea, but really you could get a heter for it because the whole idea for covering your hair is because you're married and you are no longer married. So you don't have to cover your hair. There is the idea that some say that because the Torah says that a woman's hair was tied up, and in those days, I guess socially, it wasn't just the married women, it was all women, it was all girls. And there is like this whole article that I was reading that was explaining that halacha, that once a girl hits puberty, she should really have her hair weren't getting shidduchim, so they were given a heter, like they weren't getting married, so they were given a heter to take it off. So it was a clear distinction between who was married and who wasn't. This was like a social decision. And the way that they did this was basing it off the idea that puberty can mean virginity and we can just change it to when she loses her virginity. But then there was like this problem of girls who were raped and didn't necessarily want everyone to know, or girls who lost their virginity but didn't want to just like one day start covering their hair because that would be embarrassing for them. So they were like, let's just do it that by the chuppah they have to cover their hair and that's it. Because also there were couples who got married and weren't able to consummate their marriage right away, so then like that would be really embarrassing for them. So they just kind of like made it across the board that at your chuppah you should cover your hair. But then divorced women, it kind of falls into like, well, is she not able to find the shidduch? Because like people know she's divorced, so maybe she would be able to get married even though her hair is covered. Maybe she won't. For many people, it's triggering the same idea as rape. So there's a lot of heterim to take off your hair covering. But there also is the idea of like once we do something, we don't take it off, and also like you did lose your virginity, so technically you should cover your hair and all that jazz, but there's a lot of reasons to take it off. How are wigs any better than your own hair if at times they're even more beautiful? This is something that's going to come up so many times. It comes up so many times in my life. Nowhere in the Torah, anywhere, does it say be ugly. Nowhere. It doesn't say that. You're allowed to be beautiful. We don't cover our hair because we are keeping our beauty for our husband. I mean, anybody who covers their hair knows that once you cover your hair gets really ugly really fast. I mean, I have beautiful curly hair, and if I uncover it for 2 days, my hair goes back to being its beautiful self. But when it's covered, it looks like a rat's nest, and it doesn't make it beautiful. And this idea of that we cover our hair to keep the beauty for our husbands is not true. There's no basis for it. We just went through the whole source. You see, there's no basis for it. But at the same time, we do look really beautiful when we put on wigs, and that's great. That's amazing. We're princesses. We're Jewish women. We're daughters of God. Like, go out there and be stunningly beautiful. Don't be promiscuous. There's a very big difference. Don't be promiscuous. That's the whole idea behind all of the laws of how we should behave and dress and look. That's the whole thing. Don't be promiscuous. Be respectful. So that's it for me. If there's a question I didn't answer, put it in the comments. If you like this video, please share it. Please like it, because that helps me. Thank you.